MANNFRED and the Third Vampire War, from 2124 to 2145 IC. With the death of Conrad, the last contender for Vlad's position was Manfred von CARSTEIN. Whilst Vlad was the most powerful and Conrad was the most violent, Manfred was by far the most cunning and perhaps the most magically gifted of the entire bloodline. During the time of the Second Vampire War, Manfred left Sylvania and traveled to the dead lands of Nehekara to seek out necromantic artifacts of great power. He spent the next century reading through forbidden books, and by the time Manfred returned to Castle Drakenhov, he soon possessed an entire library of dark lore. Being the last of the von CARSTEIN bloodline, Manfred became the undisputed ruler of Sylvania. For a full decade, he had bid his time wisely and allowed the Imperial contenders to believe that the threat of Sylvania was truly over. Where Vlad had ruled through his iron will and raw power, and Conrad reigned with violence and fear, Manfred used his necromantic powers and devious manipulations to forge his new undead armies. He sought out vampires from beyond the borders and bribed, coerced, and flattered them into his new retinue. He spent many long months in the wilderness of the Empire, rousing spirits and wights from their decrepit tombs and desecrating cemeteries for corpses. When vicious civil war racked the Empire once again, Manfred deemed it was time to finally strike. His undead army crossed the Sylvanian border in the depths of winter. With the summer campaigning season over, the armies of the Elector Counts were already disbanded and were completely unprepared for this sudden assault. Manfred's armies marched through the snows towards Altdorf, putting to the sword any living men they met, and raising the corpses to swell the ranks of his horde. In the infamous Winter War of 2132 IC, Manfred defeated several hastily assembled Imperial armies that attempted to block his path to the capital. Victory followed victory, and soon the rumor of Manfred's coming was enough to send villagers fleeing from their homes only to freeze to death in the cold winter snow. When his massive legions reached Altdorf, they found the city seemingly undefended. Triumph filled Manfred. He looked set to become not a vampire count, but a vampire emperor, achieving what Vlad and Conrad had failed to do. Then, the Grand Theogenist, Kurt III, appeared on the battlements of the city. The Sigmarite High Priest had brought forth the evil Liber Mortis from the deepest locked vaults of his temple, and began to recite the great spell of unbinding from its pages. As the incantation continued, Manfred's power over his minions began to weaken. Seeing his followers begin to crumble to dust, Manfred ordered a hasty retreat, for the hidden Imperial armies within Altdorf were mobilizing for a massive counterattack. Unperturbed, he marched his army along the River Reich downstream and into the port city of Marienburg, capturing several large vessels along the way and manning them with the raised corpses of their crews. Manfred's initial plan was to lay siege to the port city and then sail his zombie fleet through Marienburg's primary rivers and canals that cut directly through the city and attack from their river ports. In desperation, the entire city was roused to the defense, and in time, the first undead assault upon the ports was repulsed. Unable to make a beachhead within the riverways, Manfred began construction of massive siege towers and catapults within the outskirts of the city. However, scouts reported to him that a massive Imperial army was hounding them all the way from the city of Altdorf. Realizing he could not win this siege, he promptly retreated. So began a long cat-and-mouse chase that encircled the entire empire, with neither side entirely sure which one was the cat. At Horstenbad, the armies of Ostermark were able to surround and ambush Manfred as his army wound its way along the forest road, destroying nearly half of his forces. Yet he escaped the slaughter, and within the month had seized the town of Felf and created a new army. On and on the campaign raged, with neither side able to secure the ultimate victory. Twice, Manfred was forced to retreat to Sylvania in order to escape pursuit from his relentless enemies. Determined not to make the same mistakes as they had before, the nobility of the Empire had sworn a truce to finally rid the Empire of the vampire threat once and for all. United under a righteous cause, the entire military might of the Empire was brought forth, and in time, army after army was mustered from all the grand provinces for the Sylvanian campaign. To repay themselves for lost grudges, the High King of the Dwarfs also sent in armies of his own to reinforce the Imperials. Wave after wave of Imperial regiments were streaming into the Sylvanian borders like a massive river, scouring the dark woods and routing their foes. Eventually, the Imperial armies had forced Manfred into a pitched battle within the treacherous marches of Helfen. At the Battle of Helfen, Manfred's army was vast, his necromantic power having raised a legion of zombies from the muddy depths of Helfen itself. Manfred's unliving host continued to retreat deeper into the swamps, drawing the exhausted Imperial armies onwards into the filth and gloom. Yet Manfred was taken aback by the determination of his foes. Tirelessly, the Imperial and Dwarven armies continued to hound him until finally he was brought to battle at the eastern reaches of the marshlands, where the warriors of the Empire and the Dwarfs fought with grim resolve. He saw that victory was beyond his reach and attempted to flee. Elector Count Martin of Sturland, mounted upon a majestic griffon, gave chase and caught Manfred at the very edge of the swamps. It is said that Jerek von CARSTEIN, the former Grand Master of the Knights of the White Wolf, tore off Manfred's arm, which contained the signet ring Vlad once wore to resurrect himself from the dead. Without this ring, Manfred was now mortal. Though the Elector Count was wounded badly, His runefang cleaved great gouges into MANNFRED's flesh, and the vampire's mangled corpse sank into the depths of the swamp. Despite a long search, neither human nor dwarf ever located MANNFRED's body, but unbeknownst to them, MANNFRED von CARSTEIN was truly dead. Thus ended the reign of MANNFRED, the last of the von CARSTEINs, and the final end of the Vampire Wars once and for all. Or so the Empire had thought. Although MANNFRED truly died at the Battle of Helfen, an odd turn of events came about that resurrected him from the grave. A necromancer by the name of Stillman was within the vicinity of his buried corpse when he was suddenly killed by a group of hunters, of which included the famous duo Gotrek and Felix. The blood of the necromancer dripped loosely and flowed into the roots of a tree where MANNFRED's body lay. With enough blood going back into his body, he was able to rise once more. MANNFRED, hell-bent on taking the Imperial throne for himself and ruling over the old world, even if it took an eternity to do so, has bided his time since his defeat at Helfen. Over the years leading up to his re-emergence, he traveled far and wide to secure allies. Once his studies with the disciples of Nagash in the ruins of Lahmia had come to completion, his magical abilities had never been stronger. Yet the von CARSTEIN's plans were ambitious indeed. In return for their secrets, MANNFRED had sworn a dread pact with the corrupted Wraith wizards that yet served Nagash in the south. A pact to aid them in their own goal of summoning the great necromancer once more and bringing a new order to the world. The von CARSTEINs had secretly been working towards this same goal for centuries following the death of the rebellious Vlad von CARSTEIN. Though great progress had been made, their efforts had ultimately fallen short, for in truth, Nagash had become more like a god than a man, and his spirit was beyond even the abilities of the vampire counts to bring to the mortal realm. It would take the rituals of ancient Nehekara combined with the sacrifice of a powerful and innocent soul to achieve a true resurrection. MANNFRED, in his genius, saw a way to hasten the return of Nagash and seriously weaken those who would stand against him in one stroke.